Hello, everyone. Hello, hello, hello.
Oh,
Welcome. Can you all hear me?
Hello.
hi.
All right,
Yes.
awesome. So, first of all, let me apologize to our public. We had a little technical difficulties, but nothing was going to stop us from being great. So we're finally here. We apologize for being late, but we promise to give you guys a really, really good conversation. So I would first like to start off by introducing my panel. First of all, thank you guys so much for being here and being so patient. You all got to see the behind the scenes look of what's going on. So I appreciate you guys being there. And as leaders, that's kind of what we do. We fall back and punt and keep it moving. So I don't even know if I said that right. I like sports, but Dr. Barber, don't make fun of me, okay? So let's start off. I'm gonna introduce my panel. I'm gonna start at the order that I see you guys. So Mr. Payamps, I'm gonna start with you. If you can introduce yourself and kind of let everyone know who you are and where you're coming from and how long you've been in leadership.
Hi, everybody. My name is Mr. Moises Payamps. I am the principal at Unidos Dual Language School. It's located in Forest Park, Georgia, in Clayton County School District. I've been in leadership now 8 years. 8 years, total of 17 years in education.
Awesome. Welcome, Mr. Payamps. All right, Mr. Doray, you're up.
Thank you for having me.
Hi, Jason Doray, assistant principal at down here in Riverview, Florida, about 20 minutes south of Tampa, originally from the Sugar Hill, Beaufort area. Been in education now 17 years, and this is my 6th year as an AP.
All right, welcome, Mr. Doray. Dr. Brown.
Thank you for having me.
Hey there, doing great. My name is Dr. Brown. I am a proud principal of Terra Elementary School in Morrow, Georgia. Have about 23 years in education and have been in leadership for about 11 years.
All right, welcome, Dr. Brown. Dr. Barbara, introduce yourself to us.
Hey there, everyone. How is everyone doing? All right, I'm Dr. Barbara. I'm on with a couple of my colleagues from Clayton County, proud Clayton County public school system. I am currently serving as elementary school principal of Callaway Elementary School. I've dedicated so far 20 years of my professional career to this thing we love called public education. Serving as a classroom teacher and for the last 15 years, a school administrator. So glad to be on with you all this evening.
All right, thank you, Dr. Barbara. And Ms. Brown.
All right, hello everyone. Thank you for having me, Principal Captain Kirk. My name is Shauna Brown. I'm from Connecticut. I am an assistant principal at the Academy of Aerospace and Engineering. It's a STEM magnet school. I have been in education for 18 years, and I have been in leadership positions for the last 8 years.
All right, well,
Thank
welcome. Thank you, welcome, welcome. And those of you who've been on with us before, I'm Jamila Hood Kirk. I'm also known as Principal Captain Kirk. I am completing my 23rd year in education and my 10th year as a school principal. I have previous assistant principal experience, 5 years of that, and the rest is teaching. So I am honored to be with this panel today. I'm really excited about our content, and I'm looking forward to talking with you guys about it. So you all ready?
Yes.
All right. So
Yes, ma'am.
Those of you who are out there who are current administrators or even aspiring administrators, this is solely our own experiences. So again, we're going to talk strictly from our own experiences, and oftentimes our experiences are based on, or our thoughts are based on our personal experiences or our upbringings. And it doesn't mean that the views that are expressed are the expression of, or our districts, our school is solely ours. So we want to put that out there, but oftentimes that is what informs our leadership. And so these are great leaders on this panel. So I'm sure that whatever experiences that you all have influenced, and that's why you all are so successful as school leaders right now. So we're going to get right in there because we are running out a little bit of time. Dr. Brown, we know you'll have to leave, so if she pops out, that's why she has to leave. She has another appointment, but we thank you for taking the time. We just have to get you back on so I can get some more time with you. There's a couple things and first of all, again, there's a couple colleagues on here that we know each other, and there's some of us that we don't. So I kind of like that. It kind of keeps it authentic as well. But I follow you guys in your leadership, and by the end, we'll talk a little bit more and let other people know how to contact you, because I'm sure some people want to know how to contact you. Okay. So let's get into it. One of the things that I wanted to discuss today, and I'm going to kind of read from some of my notes that I want to kind of share. Studies have shown that more frequent exposure to people of color in school leadership positions can replace stereotyping and unconscious biases with acceptance and trust. Leaders have a distinct advantage when interacting with community members that share their cultural, racial, or ethnic background. Share your thoughts on how does this impact hiring practices in your school. So oftentimes, for example, we hear a lot, and as educators, we are very intentional, for example, in getting other male educators in our building, because we know that we have a lot of male students in our building, and we want male educators or educators that can relate to our students. As school leaders, does that impact your hiring practices or how you lead your buildings? So who would like to kind of touch on that?
So
I'll go ahead first. Oh, go ahead, Mr. Doray.
Go for it.
All right, Mr. Payamps.
Okay, all right. So I can tell you that there are situations where you go into a vacancy and you're like, I need a man for this position. But at the end of the day, any good leader is going to recognize the best talent and hire the best talent. So regardless of how you go into an interview, if you don't hire the best representative, then you failed as a leader.
Absolutely. Okay. Mr. Doray?
And I agree. It's very true what he says. What we did this past year, because we had a large turnover, we intentionally sought out more African Americans. We sought out more male teachers. We sought out more Hispanic teachers. And so it was very intentional. We got to hire, out of all of those, we got to hire quite a few of the ones. We had 27 teachers we had to hire last year over the summer. And I would say out of the 27, my memory serves me correct, about 10 of them were a mix of Hispanic, male, and African Americans. And so we were very intentional of making our faculty more diverse because of the uniqueness of where we're at. I'm the AP at Turkey Creek Middle School, which is in Plant City. Even though I live in Riverview, it's about a half an hour drive. And it's a combination of largely Hispanic, sprinkle a little bit of African Americans, and migrants who come down here from Michigan to pick strawberries and other seasonal vegetation.
Okay. And so when you all were thinking about that, why were you intentional about doing that?
We felt we needed more representation of the student body, particularly Hispanic educators. They were lacking Spanish speakers, bilingual speakers. When I first joined a couple of years ago after moving from Georgia down here, I was about the fourth person in the whole building that was bilingual and knew Spanish. So
Okay.
the faculty was majority white, and there was very little diversity. And now we're up to 14 people who speak the language, who are bilingual, and we have more African Americans who represent, even though it's a small number of families, but they also represent that group as well.
Okay, very good. All right, Dr. Barber, you were going to say?
Okay. All right.
Dr. Barber, you were going to say?
I would
You're muted.
agree with what Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. I was going to say that I agree with what my colleagues have already mentioned. I think more importantly, as an instructional leader and advocate for kids, the first priority is to seek out, recruit, and maintain those individuals who can be effective when delivering instruction inside of those classrooms, irregardless of gender or race, et cetera, et cetera. Who can I get to present to my children that will give them the most from an educational experience? So that's the only thing I think about.
Awesome. Anyone else?
Yeah.
Dr. Brown?
I think in our case, so our school is a 6 through 12 magnet school. And so we pull students from 46 different towns and cities throughout Connecticut. We are intentionally diverse in the fact that we're about 25% African-American, 25% Latino, 25% Asian, and 25% white. But our faculty is currently about 93 to 95% white. And so when we are hiring, we are intentional about making sure that we are at least trying to find staff members that represent the student body, because to me, that is very important in terms of representation. It's important for students to be able to see themselves in their staff and connect with staff of different, all different diverse backgrounds, and not just for students who are of the same background, but for different students as well.
Okay. I like that, and I definitely agree with all of my colleagues on here this evening. I definitely like to go in and, it's diversifying the staff. My building is majority African American, followed immediately by my Hispanic students, with the next highest level as it relates to population. So when I'm going in, I definitely am looking for the best candidate as well, the individual that is going to provide the children with the best academic experience, but also, to be quite honest, even outside of that, once individuals get into that building, it is about being able to develop relationships with the children. And from there being some cognitive safety within the learning environment. You can be the best teacher in the world. So we look at a lot of things. We look at as we're doing the interviews, and then when I'll come back to that, right even before we're interviewing, I would love to be able to bring to the table more Hispanic candidates. We don't tend to have a whole lot of them, but we have a very high Hispanic population, and relatability, seeing color, all of those things are vitally important. It's important to be able to have an environment where individuals or the students trust, they have relationships, they have connectivity, but you don't have a lot of applicants in there for teachers, as well as males. For elementary school in particular, it's very, very difficult to find a slew of male educators unless we're looking at physical education. So for me, definitely want to make certain that I have individuals in there that are going to meet my children and make sure that wellness, just the social piece, the connectivity, the trust, the comfort level is there. Also, that's vitally important for them to even be able to learn. And then from there, most importantly, having individuals that are able to get in there that are the best candidates to help my children not just be successful on academic assessments, but also being able to prepare them for the next grade bands and just the socialization piece outside of the walls of the classroom.
Yeah, and if I can just quickly piggyback on Dr. Brown, you said something that is so vital, and that's, when you're looking at candidates, you're trying to also assess, can that person, regardless of what color or race or background they're coming from, can they establish that relationship with students that are different from them? That's right. That's key, because somebody said earlier, you obviously, yes, you want the best teachers in there, but if they have all the skills in the world, but they don't have those social skills to connect with students who are African Americans, who are Latinos, who are Asians, except if you don't have those skills, that's vital. Then what exactly, where exactly are you? Where's your vision going with that? And so that's key. I'm glad you brought that up.
Mm-hmm. Thanks.
Absolutely. And one of the things that I think is really important too, and we talk about a lot in education. I don't know if we're as intentional as we probably could or should be, is being culturally responsive. So I think regardless if I am in a school that I am serving students that may not necessarily look like me, am I culturally responsive to, and am I intentional about learning about their culture so that I can bring those things into the classroom and also provide opportunities for them to see other successful people that look like them. I think that is also, that's key and that's important, because so I can be a teacher that may not look like the children that I teach, but I do think it's very important that you are connecting with those students. And because in many cases, for example, we may not be able to find all the male teachers that we want to come into the building, but does not mean that we don't provide opportunities for them to see other successful males in our building outside of the athletes and things of that nature, you know, other professional male beings. Yaneli Bibiano Baltasar made a good comment. She said, absolutely, I didn't have an educator that shared my ethnicity until I was a sophomore in college. She's my mentor now. It's so important to see ourselves in our teachers. And I think that's the piece that we have to keep in mind for our students. Absolutely, we are looking for the best teacher. I'm looking for that teacher who is not only instructionally sound, but can connect with my students, who are going to be intentional about building relationships. And when they get into that classroom, they're not going to overlook where my students come from, because we can look differently, but come from the same, you know, we come from the same city or the same area, or we may share the fact that we are not necessarily ethnic, but culturally we might come from the same area. So I do think it's very important that we are intentional about choosing the best person for that position. Anyone else?
Let me just add also.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
In terms of piggybacking, in terms of what you just said, Ms. Hudkirk, I think I definitely agree. I definitely think it's important. You know, there's a saying, you know, I don't see color, or we shouldn't see color. And I don't necessarily agree with that. I think love is love, and we can love it on each other. It doesn't matter the race, you know, or the ethnic, you know, just none of those, the culture, none of that. But the bottom line is we have to see color, because it's a lot that comes with the color. You know, our traditions, our culture, our norms, just things we're used to. So when we see color, I think it's a respectful thing. And then we understand that we're just respecting not my baggage, but who I am as I walk into that environment. And when we begin to see color, we're also able to work and network. Even teachers, we're learning from each other as it relates to what we bring to the table as we educate individuals that look different from us. When we see color, we're able to say, as we're teaching, whether it be Hispanic or African American or other children of color, that, and I think you said something else, Ms. Hudkirk, when you talked about, I can see myself in my leader. They have to see people of color leading as well, because a lot of times what they see is on social media, it's negative things on the news, it's negative things just in media, period, about people of color. So it's good to see people exemplifying characteristics of compassion, of competence, of integrity, and leading and support, being servant leaders of color as well. And it comes up in all shades of the rainbow. But I do believe, as you said, I want to be able to see, I can aspire, I can close the ambition gap. You know, I can, and the achievement gap, by seeing someone that looks like me as my principal, as my superintendent. So I do believe those things are important as well. No, love has no color, but it is important to be able to learn from what we bring from our own ethnicity, our culture, our traditions, which will oftentimes come with different hues and shades.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Ms. Brown. And Ms. Hudkirk, I would just also add, going back to that piece about encountering our students from a culturally responsive standpoint, that is so important, because even in many of the impoverished communities, you know, that's not even taught at home. So when we talk about the kids' culture, their backgrounds, you know, their heritage, we have to, in many cases, as teachers and educators, we have to teach that when those kids come to us. You know, ask your average fourth grader about some of the Black heroes. They can't even respond. I mean, that's not taught at home. So it's definitely important that those educators who come before those children are, first of all, know who they are, all right? I mean, whether it's white, Black, Hispanic, You have to,
Mhm.
you know, have some sense of pride of who you are to be able to appreciate those that come before you. So I think that's a definitely really, really important aspect.
So I'll start off by saying that I was at a conference once where Dr. Jose Medina, he said we have to look at each other's cultures, our traditions, our races, our ethnicities, not as barriers that we have to get through, but as an opportunity to connect. And at my school, one of those things that I thought I was going to get in trouble for is because I said, let's celebrate everything. No matter what it is, let's celebrate it. You know, your boss usually don't want to have you having parties, want to see you having parties. But there's a big sign. I think I took it down this year, but there's a big sign that said celebrate is equal to an opportunity to learn. Because when we take those different cultural aspects, and for those of you that don't know, I'm at a dual language school, and there's the 3 pillars of dual language are you know, academic success in 2 languages. And the most important thing that I want to tell you is the 3rd pillar is social cultural competence, right? So no matter what happens at my school, there has to be a cultural component to that lesson, and that's mandatory. And it doesn't, you know, it's not even a question. When we decide what lesson are we teaching, the next question goes in our collaborative planning. Okay, how do we incorporate culture? And it doesn't matter what subject you're in. It doesn't matter what subject we're talking about. We have to incorporate culture, you know. And one of the things that I know that my first year at this school, I was questioned about, because the teachers wanted to teach about Christmas. And many different thoughts of it, and Supreme Court this, and I said, look, teach about Christmas, but you better also teach about Hanukkah. You also better teach it. You know, there's a lot of different holidays that occur there. The thing that people don't sometimes get is, while we want to celebrate culture and teach culture, is not just your own, it's everybody's. So when, you know, we've had so many different things. And hopefully I'm trying to get this tradition started, but for every different thing that we do, you know, last for Mardi Gras, we had a Mardi Gras parade, and you know, for Hispanic Heritage Month, we had mariachi bands, we had all this, and that's not what made us different. What made us different is that those aren't the only days we do it. All right, so we don't just celebrate African, Black History Month in February. That's a year-long thing. We don't just celebrate Hispanic Heritage Month in September. That's a year-long thing. And until we understand that that one day or that 1 week or that 1 month of the year, that's not enough. That's a beginning. That's a good start. So we got to incorporate these things into our lessons, into our daily activities in the school building.
Which, by the way, that's awesome. You do that because you're exposing them, and that's key. You want to expose students to other cultures, other races, other ways of thinking, other values, morals, etc. I did something similar that you're doing when I was up in Atlanta, when I was working at John Lewis Elementary. We did what was called the Holidays Around the World,
Mm-hmm.
and each teacher picked a country, and they studied, you know, how that country celebrated the holidays. And then during the last week, they went from room to room learning about each country, thus the holidays around the world. And I feel like the students may not initially have gotten anything, because majority of the school was 95% ELLs, but they were exposed to it, and that's key.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, I always laugh because in our district, we have an elementary school basketball team. And I always say that we field the best soccer playing basketball team in the district.
I mean, those are some really good thoughts. I just think that, so let me ask you, because we understand as leaders how important that is. So as a school leader, some of you have talked about some intentional things that you've done to ensure that there's culturally relevant instruction happening in your schools. So can you all share some, if I were a principal or an assistant principal and I'm leading a school and that may not be present in my school, or we're not having those conversations about that, what would be one or two things you would tell me that I should do as a leader to ensure that my teachers are culturally responsive in the classroom?
Well, that's good.
Dr. Barber and then Ms. Brown.
Go ahead, go ahead, Ms. Brown. You go first.
Okay, go ahead, Ms. Brown.
Oh, I was just gonna say, I mean, one of the things is, I think starting with professional development, first of all, it's starting the conversation, period. It has to be something that is included, it's imperative. But I think there are a lot of layers to that. So one of those would be making sure that your staff are trained in having the conversation. So professional development around culturally responsive teaching, professional development around understanding themselves and understanding biases. And then making sure that we're following up. So not just, talking about it, but what are we actually doing? So making sure it's ingrained in every level of the school, between grade level teams, the leadership team, students are aware, parents. And so it's really an intentional focus and making sure that people are trained, making sure they're ready, making sure we're having conversations and making sure those conversations are ongoing and not just remaining rhetoric, but we're also putting things into practice.
Dr. Barber, thank you, Ms. Brown.
And so what I would add is, as a principal, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Can you hear me?
Yes,
Okay.
your screen is frozen, but we can hear you.
One of the things that I've always done as a principal is to make sure that before we even get down to the PD levels that Ms. Brown talked about, which is really, really important. But I think as the principal, it is, imperative that when you're having a conversation with the teachers and staff and members of the community, that you make the connection. I intentionally make the connection as it relates to the importance of being in school, as it relates to the individual groups of students. They need to understand that in 1964, we're not even talking 60 years ago, where they would be arrested for even thinking about sitting in a school, right? And I mean, let's not even, and move it back even further. Let's talk about, when kids were hung, killed, or those who were teaching our students how to read would be killed, hung, burned, whatever, right? So I make it a concerted effort to make sure everybody understands. No, we're not just telling you to read because it sounds so good. Read so you can go to high school, go to college. No, there's a connection to what's happening in the four walls of school. Now, you can take advantage of them and truly have freedom, or you cannot, and then somebody else will own your freedom. And so I think as principals, we must make sure, especially in those high transient, high poverty schools and school districts, to make sure that kids really understand the importance of coming and taking advantage of those opportunities.
Yeah. One of our watchers, Aretha Hewlett, made a comment, and she indicated that 1 month or 1 day of cultural acknowledgement isn't enough. And so I think that is a sentiment that is definitely shared amongst, and if you have a school, if you're intentional, you're having conversations, as you all indicated, that in letting your teachers know, like when you're teaching your content, fourth grade or fifth grade, let's take social studies, making sure that you are also addressing the different perspectives and knowing your students in your classroom, where do they fit into that context? And where do your families fit in? Because I think sometimes we don't allow our students to go home and say, hey, how did you fit in that? For me growing up, I knew my dad, my parents were heavily involved in the civil rights movement. Black Panther, Nation, all of that. So I knew, when I would go to school and my teachers would teach, I was the one saying, no, that's not quite right. Because my daddy said, but I had parents that were teaching me my history. Okay. So it's very different. And I think that what we're seeing right now in our world, because a lot of times we think things that happen with foreign affairs, for example, it's just out the blue, it happened. But what we don't realize, there's history as to why that happened. And we don't know the underlying history as to why certain things are happening. So what happens is we repeat. History repeats itself. It truly repeats itself. And so this is, saying Sankofa, you must look back in order to move forward. I think it's really important that we make sure that we're not just teaching the curriculum, that we're finding ways to make students connect with the curriculum, because we might find that they're more interested in it, but it's how do we make it relevant for them? So that culturally responsiveness comes to, and that's, for me, it's having those conversations about, okay, how can you connect that to the students that are in your classroom? How can you make it meaningful for them so that they understand and they would want to go and find out for themselves, what was my family doing during the civil rights time, or the, World War I, or wherever it may be? What were my parents, my families doing during that time, and whatever? And they may find that they had prominent families, or even if they didn't, but they had major contributions to what's going on right now in this world. And I think that's the main thing that we have to really be mindful about. And it goes back to value. If I value my students, then I'm going to be intentional about bringing them in the fold of, of education, and in that career. So
let me
just do this one point. So one thing that we're doing is those who are just joining us, we're talking about the importance of diversity and representation in schools, whether it's school leadership or in our teachers, or even teaching in our curriculum. So Mr. Doray, you can go ahead and comment.
So I wanted to piggyback on what Ms. Brown and yourself had mentioned about the conversations. I'll take it to the next level and say courageous conversations, because sometimes you have certain teachers that, for lack of a better word, they're just resistant, and they want to stick to just strictly the curriculum, and they don't want to think outside the box or go outside the box for that matter. They just want to stay in their safe zone. And so you have to have those courageous conversations, whether they're intellectual, emotional, moral, or even belief-based. But you got to have them. And I'm not saying that you have to be confrontational, but you got to have, you got to bring up those difficult conversations and ask why. If the students are going to benefit from that, and we know that it's in the interest of the child to have those lessons, whether they're holidays around the world or whether they're selling Mardi Gras, that's a must. I even would say that's a non-negotiable that, that needs to be done. But let me take it even a step further without getting into politics. Unfortunately, sometimes you have educators that govern themselves according to their own politics, and they cannot put that aside. And I've seen that too many times. And I don't think that that's spoken about enough. Case in point, and I'll share this, I've been now in education 17 years, I'm completing now my 6 years as an AP, looking forward eventually to being principal. Was kind of iffy in the beginning about doing that, but now I'm pretty sure I'm going to take that route. But I had a situation where we had a teacher that pulled on a student's hair. And, we know the consequences of educators, touching students, unfortunately. But I know that teacher was governing themselves according to their politics. And it was, you have to separate that when you step inside of a classroom. You have to be completely neutral, and you got to think, what is the best thing for these kids who may not necessarily, I don't reflect who they are, but surely, number one, as we have said before, they need to learn about their culture. They need to, be sensitive to their needs. And I'll use back again, when I spoke earlier about, the migrant community, there are so many things right now that community is going through. I mean, these are the children of farmers that pick our food while we've been on lockdown and we're doing all these Zoom meetings, Dr. Barbara talked earlier about, the heroes. Well, unfortunately, these students right now, their voices are silent because they don't really have those heroes right now. And maybe they do, and I haven't really done my research, but I mean, as far as I can see right now, who are they who's here right now, they really, they lack. We'll say that they lack. We won't say that they don't have any, but they lack, unfortunately.
Absolutely.
You know, talking about politics, I think one of the gifts of this current administration is that it allows us to bring in those difficult conversations. In my case, I'm in a third grade classroom just observing, and the topic comes up about crossing the border. You know, in my school, that topic really hits. So, you know, the teachers definitely prodding and talking about the different things, the different trials that you go through. Why do people really want to come to the United States? Why do they risk the things they risk? Why do you walk through, you know, why are you 5'7" and walking through, you know, 6-7 feet of river trying to get into the United States? You know, and I think that's one of those things that the current administration have definitely put a blessing as far as what do they call teachable moments in that sense. And you know, the teacher did a great job of getting every student engaged, not just those that have gone through it. Me being in there was also very helpful in that I was able to talk about, well, I'm not Mexican, I'm Dominican, but we can talk about being deported. You know, we can talk about not being able to come back in this country, about being, you know, about those kind of things about travel. You know, one of the things that people forget, that the rights given on Americans is not equal to what different countries around the world receive. Americans have the right to travel. Americans have, you know, we have a visa to wherever we want to go to. I have family in the Dominican Republic who the consulate will just not see. You can't go nowhere, and they just can't travel just because, you know. But those things that the current political climate has brought to us, we most definitely have to capitalize on what's there, because you know, with this generation, we can definitely sow a seed of, you know, why is America great? Why do people want to be here? Why is it important that humanity looks after humanity? Why is it important that, you know, I heard it said somewhere that that what you do to the least of my brothers, you know what I'm talking about. So it's very important that we seize those opportunities, because those are not only culturally relevant, those are socially relevant. Those are, you know, in every which way, how we shape our future, and how we shape, I guess, saying it again, humanity, as the future comes through.
Absolutely.
Let me just add also, going back to what Mr. Doray mentioned as it relates to those courageous conversations. From a leadership standpoint, oftentimes, and this happens to fairly new administrators or leaders, when it comes to having those courageous conversations, oftentimes they lack the skill of not making it or taking it personal. When they mentioned that teacher who disregards, you know, incorporating her or his students' cultural backgrounds. Okay, so then the conversation becomes about what you said or how you said it to the teacher versus the main thing, which is that teacher actually incorporating and integrating cultural relevance in her teaching. All right. So I think principals have to be very cognizant of that when they're having those courageous conversations. Oftentimes I use a tactic where I turn the table, and that means I'll ask the teacher, you have kids? That's all you got to do. Because see, you hit home when you ask people about their children, and then all you do is you say, you see that situation you had or presented or set up or fostered with the children in your classroom? imagine if your kids were in that seat, would your approach be different? You know, so there's a skill and there's a way to getting those teachers on that path who are less reluctant to do so.
Awesome. Dr. Brown?
Yes, and then from there, everyone just painted the picture so well. Going back to what Ms. Brown said about making sure that after we have the connections that Dr. Barber talked about, and we have these authentic pieces that we have from Mr. Doray, as well as Mr. Moises, how am I saying this last name? I want to Payamps as well. I think it's vitally important to make certain that it can't just be another buzzword in your building. You know, the culturally, that it can't be another buzzword. It can't be just another program. When it's presented, it has to be something that's coming from the heart because it's relevant to the population, to the clientele, to the individuals that you're serving in your home, in your building. So once that happens and that professional development that Ms. Brown so eloquently spoke about, we develop and we get all of these different experts, everyone's on board because it's relevant. It's going to meet the needs of the migrant workers, of the families. We're able to speak to them about their heroes, even though I may not come from that background. But as the training goes on, then once again, like Ms. Brown said, it's not a buzzword. It's a part of what we do. It's a part of what we breathe, the culturally responsiveness daily in our building. And then we have experts that even train the new folk that say, this is how we do it. This is what we do on Thursdays. This is how it looks in the evenings when we do our virtual now with the new normal on this day. It's a part of what we do. It's a part of the vision. And when we already know when the vision is made plain and we understand what it is and we have those who are willing to follow us, delegation happens and it just begins to take life on its own. So it's about the monitoring that Ms. Brown talked about, implementation, monitoring, consistency, not a buzzword, just a part of what we do as it relates to being culturally responsive.
Awesome. Okay, so I'm going to switch gears. I'm going to go ahead and go to our second question, and then we'll wrap up for our third one by letting everyone share out about the their work-life balance. So the second part of the interview, I kind of want to talk about the impact of the pandemic has unfolded, and as it has unfolded, it's revealed what many of us have already experienced or known about the communities in which we serve with our students. And that the most impacted communities with the COVID-19 virus are those who are typically unseen, unheard, underserved communities that perpetually face health inequities and higher rates of chronic health conditions. So for me, for example, in the schools, obviously those are areas where I have, we are like 99% free and reduced lunch. So for my families and for my students, their parents are the essential workers. They are the ones that still have to go to work. And we had a conversation about this in our district recently. When we go back to school, it's going to have to be, we're going to have to approach it a little differently than what we would have done otherwise, you know, any other beginning of school year based upon the things that have unfolded recently. So what conversations have you had with your leadership teams or your school districts about those next steps as we walk into the 2021 school year? Dr. Brown, let's start with you.
Mm-hmm. Well, for me, I do believe that, especially with this COVID-19 pandemic, the one thing we continue to do as leaders is, and for me, everybody in my building is a leader. It's not just the leadership team, it's a conversation overall, is we don't change anything we've done. The only thing we can do is amp up what we've done in leadership in terms of just making certain that now we understand the most important thing we have is communication, compassion, just making certain that we are meeting needs. The academics are vitally important. We want to make certain that our children have what they need there. But right now, we have to kind of flip it. We've always been, but it goes up because it's no time for a lack of communication or miscommunication during a pandemic. We have families right now that we haven't seen or haven't been able to reach out to and connect with since we closed on the 16th. So we have various layers of communication teams. We have communication liaisons. We have the traditional teacher communication. We have an administrative communication team. It's all a wraparound system of communication. Whereas our parents, we're reaching out to them several times a week just to say, what are your needs? What do you need? How can we support? And from there, we're finding out about all of the social, not band-aids that we can use to put on to cover things up, but how can we get out? Because we too, as leaders, are essential staff members. We get out there, Ms. Hudkirk, and you know it, with those gloves on and those masks, and we make sure, I've seen your caravans, you know, we have them, we're making certain that our families have supplies, they have the work that they need, and they have food. If they can't get up to our schools or our sites where we have food pantries, we have individuals that are safely taking individuals those things into the community. So the bottom line here is, right now, for us, one of the main things is staying in touch, being in tune to the needs of our community, making sure that we are, if we had business partners, we really need you. We're gonna have to amp it up. This is what how can you support? Our counselors are there, our social workers, but when those resources run out, what can you do for us as it relates to with the businesses that have signed up to be our partners? So it's really communication amped up, compassion and care amped up. It's about the social piece now, the mindset, just making certain that everyone has what they need to stay, how can I say it, have a sound peace of mind. So those are some of the things that we do. Communication is vitally important.
Absolutely.
And Ms. Hudkirk, I would add, you know, in response to your question, and well said, Dr. Brown, one of the things that I've talked about, I'm thinking within the last week and a half with my twin brother, who is also educational leader, serving in the role of deputy assistant superintendent. But a couple of things that became very apparent and was brought to the forefront for us as educators. Number one, the lack of technology readiness. And what I'm speaking of is one-to-one devices per student across every school district across the country. It's 2020. So even that one thing right there puts us behind. We should not be 2020 and there are issues with kids not having access to devices to bring inside the home. That's number one. Number two, it's also apparent that when we talk about technology integration in our schools, in our classroom, where? Because if technology was being integrated at the level that it was supposed to, you would not have had as many issues as we did in some of the schools and some of the communities. Okay, so why is it that school A, the transition was very, very smooth when all this happened, and school B, it's struggling, parents are crying, and teachers are stressed out? Why? Because they didn't have those fundamentals set up anyways. You should have, if you're a Google district, Google Classroom should have been a tool that should have already been in play through the instructional program. And so when you ask the question about through this pandemic, what is it that we need to do in the future as we move forward in education? And the third piece that I note in response to that question is that now it's heightened the level of students being accountable for their learning. See, we've always said that, but if you have a 6th grader, 7th grader, 8th grader, and I'm not talking about the kindergartners, okay, we get it. They have to be taught that, right? But if you have 6th, 7th, and 8th graders who can't get on a laptop, can't go step to step, here, there, that's a problem in 2020. Because they're going to have to be able to do that in college. They're going to have to be able to do that when they get to the workforce. You get a job, people tell you what the job descriptions are. They might give you a week or two of training, then you're on your own. And so those are a couple of things that I think we definitely are going to have to focus on moving forward in education.
I'm so happy that I was invited to this, because I feel like this is the conversation. Like, I feel like I'm with my staff right now and my principal, and my assistant, we're having the same conversation.
Right.
you know, and I'm going to add something to what you said, Mr. Barber, and that is it exposes the equitable or lack thereof. You know, the fact that there is no one-on-one, there is no, you know, we talk about equality, but it's being equitable or having some kind of equitable distribution of, you know, just because they have an iPhone doesn't mean anything. They don't have a computer like, you know, majority of us right now are on a computer, and we can do this. Especially, and I'll say back again to the migrant community around, you know, across this country. It just has exposed it to another level that I don't think we've seen it before. And that is sad. It's the reality. And, you know, when you talk about having conversations, we've already started to think and talk about what is that going to look like. And I typically don't sound pessimistic. I happen to think I'm pretty optimistic, but I say if we do come back in August, I mean, let's be real.
Right.
If we do come back in August, okay, we're thinking maybe it's going to be in phases where maybe a third of the building comes in if we have to stick to the CDC guidelines. That means that the other, you know, 2/3 of the students are going to be exactly doing what we're doing right now with e-learning. So, okay, we bring a third into the building, especially if they're sixth graders, because chances are at the elementary level, they might not have that exposure to technology. So we're gonna actually tell the teachers this is gonna be one of our non-negotiables. You're gonna have to do at least minimum one lesson a week while we have them in school. You know, we call our platform EDSB. So through EDSB, you're gonna have to learn how to submit an assignment, how to check your grades, how to do that. And by the way, you spoke about the students, you know, being on the computer and do it, self-discipline. Yes, that's a skill that they're gonna have to learn through the goods and the bads. You're gonna have to learn how to be self-disciplined to do exactly, you know, what you would normally do in a classroom.
Absolutely. So some of our comments have been, yes, we must have compassion, Maslow before Bloom's, not once one is sad. Yes, we're behind the 8 ball. This has exposed the digital divide. The exposure to tech is a social justice issue. And then some of my patients did not have internet, while others may have had internet with low bandwidth. This certainly impacted the quality of our sessions. So, and we've talked about that. All of us have probably talked about that in our districts or in our school levels, is that even if we have the devices, that we still have the issue of internet access. And so it definitely did expose what I've been saying on the past talks, that our slips have been showing, because that inequity, which we knew was there, but it certainly revealed more when all of this came about. I also wanted to make a point that we had this conversation this week at one of my district meetings in our group, that there's going to be, we have to also face that there's some true trauma happening right now for students. And so going back into the school, as much as we do understand that we have to pick up and make sure we're intentional about the instruction so that we can get our students caught up, we also can't leave out the trauma that some students might have endured while being out, including adults, including our staff members. And I've said this before, I know of other educators who do have anxiety because of this. And they do worry about what's going to happen. And even going back into the school, there has to be, you know, as school leaders, we know the first priority, everyone says the first thing you have to make sure students are safe. That's the first and foremost before you do anything else. Part of that means some sense of security, knowing that when I send my child to school, or if I come to school, that I'm going to be okay. And I don't know about you guys, but as a leader, sometimes, you know, typically we're looked to have all the answers, right? But this is new for all of us. But it doesn't keep me from always thinking about how am I going to make sure there's even just a sense of feeling safe, even though I may not have really totally control over that, but they're going to be looking for me to be able to provide that to them. And that's a real thing. And I think sometimes, and people don't know that we think about that constantly as leaders, that we don't just, okay, we'll just come on in the building, get your rooms together, whatever. We want you to truly be safe. But on the other hand, we also know there's some things that truly have to happen so we can make sure that we can run as smoothly as possible for our students. Because if it comes out and we're chaotic, then that's not going to be good either. So we have to have a smooth thing. So how are you all going to address those, what about the trauma-informed instruction? Like, how are you going to address those feelings when students and teachers and staff members come back in the fall, in addition to your instruction, Ms. Brown?
I think the first thing, and Jamila, that is a great question. And, I am a firm believer that any leader with sense, and I've said this since I've been home, any leader that thinks they're going to go back into a building and starts talking about ABCs and 1, 2, 3s off the bat and pre-assessments and assessments, are going to be riding a bicycle uphill. There are so many kids, when we talk about trauma and PTSD, there are so many kids that have seen death. There are some kids, they've had friends that are not coming back to school with them. They've seen violence because the household grew to a situation of people just trying to survive and frustration. You heard about the domestic violence rates that have gone up. These things are going to have to be addressed, and they have to be addressed effectively. And in my case, we are a PBIS school, and we also include aspects of SEL, that socio-emotional learning. So the first thing that must happen is classroom meetings. Don't talk to me about anything about no academics. I wouldn't care as a principal if for the first month, if you had a class meeting every day for the first 2 hours of the day, you're fine with me, because I know that's going to be the only way that you're going to be able to get those children back primed, ready to learn.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I agree. I mean, I think, I agree, Dr. Barber, that even more important than academics at this time and when we return is going to be that social emotional piece. And I agree, Principal Hudkirk, that trauma-informed instruction and trauma-informed practice have to be at the center of everything we're doing. At my school right now, we're fortunate that we were already a one-to-one technology school. And so all of our students have one-to-one devices, especially at the high school where I coordinate. And the students that did not have those devices, we made sure they all got them. Students who did not have Wi-Fi, we got them on hotspots. We were really, really, really fortunate in that area and in that way. But what we're seeing now is a kind of drop off in student engagement. So it's not even about the technology at this point. We had the technology, but it's about that engagement piece and the social emotional piece, because many of the students that are dropping off at this point, because of, sometimes they're going through anxiety, depression, just quarantine fatigue, and just they're kind of drifting off, and they're seeing all these images around them every day. Again, I'm in Connecticut, so we're right next to the epicenter of where everything's going on. We have the 3rd highest death rate per capita for COVID right now in the country. And so it is a lot. And we started talking about trauma-informed instruction before we left, and as part of what we do, but that's going to be even more critical for us to understand as we go back. On the academic side, which is secondary, we're looking at engagement. And so at the center and the core of engagement is the relationship piece. So I'm finding, so I'm the principal for the high school, and I'm finding that students who already did not have a strong relationship with those teachers, those are the ones who are least likely to attend and engage with the instruction and everything that's going on now.
Just had that conversation with the teacher today. Just had it today.
The connection and that relationship, those are the ones that are showing up. And so it's not just about, do you have access? Yes, but they're choosing at some points which teachers they have a better relationship with. They are going there. And also, are you understanding how to engage students online? As I think it was Mr. Doray that mentioned before, if we go back in August, or if we have to continue some kind of tech integration or some kind of a hybrid of the online learning, our teachers are going to have to understand how to engage students online. So just presenting or just handing out work is not teaching. We're going to have to understand and learn how we're going to engage students in this new way going on.
Yeah, I feel like this is what we're going through right now. the fact that the majority of the country went on spring break on March 16th. And I feel like almost this is like a dry run, almost in preparation for the fall, to an extent. One thing that whether you're elementary or, high school, doesn't matter what level, students are resilient. Children are resilient. They're going to need that month. You're absolutely right, Mr. Barber. They are going to need, but once they have that counseling, they're resilient. They'll bounce back and they'll be good to go. The only problem I see, or the only issue actually that I see, is there are going to be certain students that are going to need a little bit more of that social emotional learning than others. African American children may need that. Hispanic, migrant children are probably going to need that, maybe compared to their white counterparts. I'm sorry, that's the truth. They're going to need it more because of the socioeconomic status in a lot of these, children's cases, and the family homes, as you had mentioned, the skyrocketing of domestic violence and other issues that have come in with all of us being, lockdown, I guess is the right word of use. Yeah.
Quarantine.
Quarantine.
Yeah. It's just something that I think we just need to really be intentional about and have conversations. And I think we should have those conversations now. Most of us as administrators, we typically are planning already for the upcoming school year. So I know there's specific things that we're doing. So I recently, have already started putting in works my virtual learning team, because I can't make these decisions, by myself. It truly is going to be a collective effort of the staff to come together and make sure that we are providing the best services that we can for students, that we're going to utilize our circle support team for that SEL, or how are we to address how we're going to create a culture of empathy and responsibility. Because I'm looking at things such as restorative practices and restorative circles. And so, we talk about those community meetings or those classroom meetings. It's going to really be important that we train our teachers and have a way for our students and staff to be able to express themselves during this time, so that they will have some kind of outlet and it doesn't impact their instruction or learning in the classroom. So those are just little things I know, and talking with other leaders, I know some schools are SEL schools. And if you're not, you're looking into for yourself and how you can go back and train your own staff. If you have PBIS, you have some things in place that kind of help develop that behavior and can address, because PBS is just not about, being punitive in behavior. It's about, addressing the whole child and putting things in place where everyone is feeling responsible for the school. So I think it's going to be, and you're right, the one thing that I'm going to say, and going back to you, Ms. Brown, literally, I had a conversation with a teacher this afternoon about that, and she made that comment because we were comparing one class, the level of engagement in one class versus another, and we attributed to the relationships that the teacher had with those students before this all happened. And so they're not beating down the doors to get to that classroom. And in some instances, they're jumping over to the other class, even though that may not be their teacher, because they feel that engagement. And one of the things that we even talked about when we started this venture in March is, when you start your virtual lessons, start off by asking how everyone is doing.
Right.
Don't even just jump right into instruction. Get a pulse of how your students are doing, so that you know what you're working with and what your audience is feeling. And the same thing with parents. One of the things that's going to be key when we go back, we have to be thinking about how we're going to address our parents, our staff, and our students. So yes, that means working with our parents and train them how to use virtual. Some of them, how to teach at home if we're going to have virtual days, because they're saying that we may have this same situation in the fall. So what are we going to do? Open house, Title I meeting at the beginning of the year to really train our families to be prepared for this, instructionally and emotionally. How are we going to train our teachers to make sure they have if you're using Google Suites, do they have all the tools that they need? And like you said, it can't just be on when we get out. It has to be part of your culture and it's a practice that you do. So a minimum of at least once a week, for example, that's just something that you do, and making sure they're engaged in that. And then your students, making sure that they only, for our district, for example, we're fortunate our superintendent has pushed for us and our board, thankfully, they will have one-to-one devices for our 3rd through 12th, and then we'll have K2 will have access. So it's not just about utilizing, but then taking care of it, So now you have a device, it's something that's a responsibility for yourself. How are you going to take care of this device? So we have to put things in place now and be thinking about, what if we don't come back? What are we going to do? And then when we do come back and we have a short window, how are we going to get that done? And all of those things are going to be very important. And we really need to be thinking about that social emotional piece. Some schools have those individuals in the building to support the social emotional and those families, or if you have a parent liaison, we may be thinking about how can we connect with other outside agencies like counselors or social workers or psychiatrists and psychologists, and how can we build capacity in our schools? So those are some few things that for me as a leader that I've been thinking about, how can I really, and it's not anything that we really should be doing because of the pandemic, we really should have been doing already, but it's forced our hand to do that. So we have to really look differently in how we prioritize things and making sure that everyone feels okay with it. And I believe the more we equip people with the knowledge, the better they'll feel about what's going on.
And if I may, it's also establishing that relationship, not only with the student, but when you're making that call, as you said, with that parent or with the parents or the guardians or whoever takes care of these, children, you have to establish, instead of jumping in right away and say, hey, well, Jose didn't do his work. Well, hold on, let's back up. How's everybody doing? Is anybody sick? Is there any way that I can help? Why is he struggling? And,
empathy.
And just have that human empathy that we've been talking about all this time.
Yeah, absolutely. And even
Also,
for our teachers. Go ahead, Mr.
I think that, one of the things that we do have to realize is how this has really emphasized the school role in the social emotional of each student, but not only for the student, but for our teachers as well. Because when you establish those relationships, I had a conversation with a student the other day that told me she really missed school. And it wasn't because she missed her kids. It wasn't really because she missed the teacher. She loved her teacher, but the difference was that teacher was the only time she ever heard "I love you." So, those things, it changes how you see, because we've always understood that for many of our impoverished students, school is the only time they eat. When I was a high school teacher, I know that I used to go to the school early to open up the bathroom so the kids could shower. I would go early to open up locker rooms so that they could have light to do homework. But you don't really think about, those things like empathy, compassion, just a regular conversation with a student or with a child, because they're not being held at home. Usually from 7 to 3, that conversation is being held with teachers. Parents come home after work, they cook, they want to go to bed, and it's very difficult. But understanding the role that the school plays, there has to be a new and different plan when we return to whatever we return to, as far as how we approach the intentionality of our social emotional learning.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you said, keeping in mind the adults, because one of the things, we have to turn in a report at the end of the week to just kind of monitor how many students are engaged. And so I created a form for my teachers to complete the first week. By the second week, it compelled me to go ahead and put the first question is, how are you doing? And how can I assist? Just for the teachers, for the staff. Because what I realized is that, after having a conversation, being on one of my meetings with teachers, that I had, some teachers that were feeling a little anxious about things. And so from that, then now I check it. And if there's a teacher that indicated I'm not so good today, I'm feeling anxious, frustrated, whatever, they get a personal call from me, because I want to also make sure that they're okay. I have to make sure that their cups are filled, because I'm expecting them to fill the cups of my students. I have to keep a pulse on them as well. Because again, it's not just that, we look at students, when they walk in the door on a regular school day, we can size them up and know exactly what kind of day they're going to have. That's the same thing for our staff members. We knew exactly when they walked through the door, how based on the demeanor, tone, how their day was. And you knew, okay, I'm gonna go by that teacher's room a couple times for today just to check. I'm not gonna necessarily say anything, but I noticed something today. I can't do that. And I have to rely on my teacher. So that's one thing that I know that we also just have to keep in mind. Like someone said on here, yes, we have to have grace, we have to have compassion for everyone in these situations as we're moving forward. Okay. All right, so the last thing we're going to go over, last point is, and I try to incorporate this in the other talks that I did, and I think it's very important. As school leaders, we typically are pouring into other individuals in our school communities. And oftentimes, sometimes we neglect our own personal needs. So one of the things that was vividly clear for me was the importance that and I'm a work in progress. So, and don't ask my husband because he might tell you differently, but I'm working on it. I'm doing better, but I'm working on it, is the work-life balance. And I know I've heard this, I'm part of like different Facebook groups, and when people are asking, do you all feel like you all are working even harder than you were when you were in the school? You know, constant Zoom meetings or Google Meet meetings. And I don't know about you, I have children from 2 all the way to 17 in the house. So it's constantly, 4 children constantly going and, having meetings, and the 2-year-old standing behind me in the chair. It's, so I understand teachers who might be home teaching and also have their own children. So I understand that I can relate. So I think it's important, but what I have noticed is being home, obviously we were spending more time with each other than we were obviously before. How do you as school leaders, if you could write a letter to your first year self as a principal or an assistant principal, what would be the one advice you would tell yourself to ensure that they have a work-life balance? I'm going to start with you, Mr. Doray.
So I would definitely write and say that you need to have your own personal space, whether it's a different room in the home if feasible, or just a personal space like we teach our students. Hey, have a personal homework space where you work there. But know that once that you step out of that room or you're done with that workspace, you are done. You have to completely disconnect, and you have to be very intentional and methodical about it, because if you don't, obviously this is where the stress starts building in. That I would also say that takes a lot of organization, planning out your day. And nowadays there's tons of ideas of how to get organized to suit individual needs, depending on the location of where you work. Not every location is the same, but I would definitely say organization, disconnect intentionally at a certain time once you've laid out your day, so that you can de-stress, so that you're fresh for the next day. And exactly what I'm doing now, like today has been my longest day. So today that has been out the window because I was actually in the building, because we are a hub, a feeding site. So not only are we feeding our students, we're handing out laptops and we're handing out packets. And then of course I was happy to do this, but this is always, even if I didn't have to do this, or because I wanted to do this, by the way, I keep saying this was great because it's like talking to an extended family since we're having the same conversations. I mean, it's just even thinking about writing that letter, with everything that's going on, it would be unimaginable that we would actually be going through something like this. Organization, de-stressing at a certain time, being intentional on planning out your day, especially in a time like this. If you want to make that last phone call at 4:55, so be it, but make it your last one, and that's it. And you disconnect and you distress and go have fun. I have 2 kids too, and sometimes they just want to run around the house and play tag. I'm good with that.
Right. Awesome. All right, Ms. Brown, what do you do?
So I would actually agree with everything Mr. Doray said. I think thinking as he was talking, I'm thinking about my first few years in administration. And I think one of the things I did was that I didn't know when to turn everything off. So it was like around the clock, it's on my phone, it's on Saturdays, it's on Sundays, it's all day, all evening, until I, zonk out and go to sleep. And And so I would tell myself, my first few years self, to know when to cut it off, right? Know when you just have to just end it for the day and do what you need to do. Some of the things I do for balance, I would say, are one, I always find joy. So things that make me happy, things that lift my spirit, I like to gravitate towards those things. And it's part of knowing yourself also. So knowing what brings that joy for me. For me, it's like connecting with friends, connecting with family, traveling when I can, and just sometimes just change of sceneries and just laughing. So those are some of the things that I would do, that I do now in terms of work-life balance. And that's what I would tell my first few years self.
Awesome. All right, Mr. Payamps.
So this a little difficult for me in that this is my first year as a principal, and I can't compare it to the first year as an administrator. You know, when you're at the top of the food chain, it's a little different. And so, you know, because when you're the AP, you swear you're doing all the work, and it may be true because, you know, the AP may be doing all of the footwork, you know, but the things that you have to answer to. And, you know, I commend everybody on this panel and everybody watching who's an educator, because keep in mind that we're not continuing what we're doing as a distance learning. We're not continuing this as digital learning. This is crisis learning. And, you know, so what would I tell my first year self? I'm living through it. It's you know, it's like, how could, you know, how do you know what you don't know? So all I could tell myself is, I hope every year is not like this, you know? But
What a way to finish your first year.
yeah, what a way, you know? And the thing is that, but I will say this, and that's in learning to disconnect, because this year, the end of the current school year and the beginning of the next school year, you may never see a transition. So while normally in the summertime, we know we have at least that 1 week break that the district forces us to take in July 4th, in our case anyway, we've been working through in our homes. You know, don't let home become the workplace. You know,
Yeah,
and we have to make sure that you separate. You know, like why do we need that space that is our space? Because we have to work from home. So once you know, there's all you see is beach around me. So once I'm off the beach, I got to be back to dad, to husband, to uncle, to whatever it is that I'm doing. I have to go back to that, or else, you know, there's got to be that break.
And Dr. Barber, you're gonna finish us on out.
Yes, in response to that work-life balance, I think fitness is key. You know, I know personally for me, it helps to keep the stress levels down, you know. And then, you know, you have to make a concerted effort and put deliberate thoughts in your head with the idea that, hey, when I leave this building today, I'm at the house, and, you know, and I'm off work. What happens is,
That's
just
true.
over time, by nature of who modeled for us when we were teachers or when we were assistant principals, you have some people that work like they're going to get an award because they worked on a Saturday. You're not going to get an award. Okay. They're not going to be giving out the best instructional leadership award during the pandemic. Like, you know, I'm seeing people doing all kind of foolishness. No, I'm only doing what I need to do to continue to support my school and my school community. All right. And then I'm going to, you know, go on about my day. So I think fitness for me is key. And then also, just as an adult, you take time for yourself in the evenings. If that means you sit out there on the deck and you have a cold adult beverage, that's something to look forward to. What's wrong with that? You know, we got to a point where it becomes so politically correct. Like, I'm a human, you know? And so there's a lot when you talk about work-life balance, there's a lot out there to keep us balanced. It's just a matter of fact. It just depends on, are you going to access it or not? So I'll wrap up with that, Jamila.
Okay. Well, thank you guys. I wrote down all the tips, so I will work on that for myself. I will say I'm totally different than I was when I first became a principal. I was to the point I would come home and get on the couch fully clothed and fall asleep and wake up in the middle of the night, and they just didn't bother me. So I was so tired. But because I was just constantly going. And it is hard to separate more now because you're working in the home. And like I said, your family, they understand, but they don't understand. They still want mommy time or daddy time or uncle time or aunt time or whatever. So that's been the hardest part. And especially if you have, younger children, they definitely don't understand and they don't care. I need mommy. So I appreciate you guys coming on. I think the information that you all share were some really golden nuggets. If you can quickly, we'll go around and say how, Mr. Payamps, how can someone get in touch with you if they want to get in touch with you further? What would be, how would you want them to contact you?
Email or social media. Social media, you have Instagram, Principal Payamps, Facebook, Principal Payamps, Twitter, I think it's at Principal Payamps, but it just changed. So I forgot. Okay. But there's also at Dual Unidos, which is the school's Twitter, which I'll get it to as well. Also the school website, 198.clayton.k12.ga.us. And if you look for administration, once you click on my picture, it automatically sends an email.
Okay, awesome. And just before we go on to everyone else, just a reminder that we did talk about 3 points today. We talked about the importance of diversity and representation in schools. We talked about how we're going to prepare differently and lead differently virtually and fearlessly going into the upcoming school year. And then we wrapped it up by talking about our work-life balance. And so, Mr. Doray, how can individuals get in contact with you?
So the best way is the reverse order of my name. So last name, Doray Jason, and that would be at Doray Jason using Twitter. That's actually going to be their best bet.
Awesome. All right. Miss Brown,
All
how
right.
can we get in touch with you?
So I am on Facebook. My public page is S Brown Consulting. So I'm on there. I also have a business page on Instagram called Teach for the Culture, and another page on Instagram called Black Women in Leadership. And that's where I host the Black Women in Leadership Network.
Awesome. Thank
you.
So
any of those 3.
Awesome. Dr. Barbara, how can they get in touch with you?
Okay, so Jamila made me do this, but Instagram, Principal Barbara, all right. Twitter, I've had the Twitter forever. On Twitter, the Professor, so that's DA Professor 06 for Twitter. Also, you can just email me at Sheadric, and that's SHEADRIC .Barber, BARBRA at bnseducationalconsulting.org. So those 3.
All right. And again, I'm Principal Captain Kirk. You can contact me at Principal Captain Kirk on Facebook, on Instagram, or on the blog site, principalcaptainkirk.com, or at my on my email, principalcaptainkirk@gmail.com. And that's Captain with a C. And again, thank you guys. We went a little bit over, and we just kind of went over as a thank you for those of you who hung in there with us, because we did have some technical difficulties in the beginning. So we got started a little bit late, and we didn't want to disappoint you guys. I hope you all were able to gain some insight from these fearless leaders, and I hope the leaders were able to gain some insight from each other. I really, truly appreciated you all coming on. I learned a lot from you guys, and I know we'll stay connected because now we're BFFs. So, and if you, again, everyone has shared their contact information if you want to contact them individually. Thank you again, guys, for coming on, and I hope you all have a wonderful end of the year and a prosperous 2021.
Thank you. Great job.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
No problem. You all
Thank you
hang
for having
on.
us.
You all
Really
hang on,
appreciate
and
it.
I'm gonna tell the captains bye. Thank you, captains out there.